quickly onto our second keynote opening presentation, ladies and gentlemen. Really an international speaker gracing our stage, as you'll see many of them throughout the course of the next couple of days. She's traveled to us from New York and is recognized as a thought leader in the financial services industry. Nancy O'Malley from MasterCard is the Executive Vice President of the Payment System Integrity at MasterCard. In that capacity, she's led both the development and execution of global strategies for marketplace safety and security, looking at developing global fraud prevention strategies, invention and innovation across the fraud space, looking at fraud products and solutions massively across the industry in all safety and security issues. She also currently serves on the Federal Reserve Bank's Secured Payment Task Force Steering Committee and is a past chairman of the American Bar Association's Retail Banking Subcommittee. We're delighted that she's traveled in from America. Please could I ask you to put your hands together and give Nancy O'Malley a warm South African welcome. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid my comments will be somewhat more casual, and I hope that we have an opportunity to really have a conversation today about the future of our industry. I would like to thank our host, Mr. Volker, and the Deputy General for his comments. They certainly set the stage and give me an opportunity to talk some about what MasterCard's thinking is in the safety and security space. When you have an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity such as this, to travel to South Africa and enjoy the countryside and this audience and the thinking that's going on in another part of the world, that's an invitation that someone such as myself will never pass up. So I thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My comments today will not be about MasterCard products and services, but rather about the strategic thinking that we do as a company and how we participate in various industry groups and work with regulators to set strategy for our industry overall. So to that extent, I hope I fulfill your needs and desires from a keynote speaker in this process. Of course, my quick commercial message, MasterCard is here as a sponsor. We're glad to talk to you about products and services at any time. We do have a booth outside for that purpose. So with that, let's get started, shall we? Let's see, here we go. Oops. No conversation about the payments industry is complete without starting with where we are. And there's no question, as we heard from the Deputy General, and you'll hear, I'm sure, throughout your conference, about the fact that what is happening in our industry is unprecedented from a change perspective. There are so many challenges that we're facing in terms of the development of new technologies, how we work with them, what the fraud or risk implications might be associated with their use, such as blockchain. We heard about that. But I think probably what's more important than any of this is the thinking that goes on around what can happen, what should happen, what will happen, and how we prepare ourselves for that so that we can respond quickly. I think one of the most interesting things that we encounter, and I've got a long history of work in the banking and financial services industry, is that the way we've done things historically really is no longer relevant, nor for that matter, no longer useful. I don't know about your companies, but many of the financial institutions across the globe that I speak with talk to me about the fact that, well, you come talk to me about a new technology and a new idea, but let me tell you what I have to do internally within my company. First of all, I've got to develop a business case. Then I've got to present it if I want to implement the new technology. Then I've got to build some integration. I've got to go through a budget cycle, I've got to get approval, and then I can get something implemented. Well, think about, for all of you, for many of us, that's a fairly long timeline, right? But the problem is that the fraud community, the criminal community, those who are committing cybercrime, are not encumbered by business processes, budgets, and approval cycles. So as we combat what's occurring in our industry, I think probably the most important thing that we need to start talking to each other about, and about our regulators and with our leadership in financial institutions and in providers and merchant communities, is preparedness. It really is almost as if you have to prepare for war. We have to be agile, we have to be smart, We have to anticipate. Readiness is critical. And our ability to react timely is foundational to not only our survival, but to the protection of the financial institutions, and far more importantly, the customers with whom we serve. So let's talk about what some of these critical changes are that we see happening. The blurring of the physical and digital boundaries. That certainly is well underway, and I'm sure you've experienced it here. But what does that mean? We have financial services companies now entering into the payment space. They're great partners because they bring incredible technology to our industry, which we can utilize in a host of different ways. But they're also untested in terms of their ability to protect the consumer and to provide the right infrastructures to deliver products safely and securely. That's a huge challenge. As we bring the fintech companies into our world, or they bring us into theirs, which is really what is occurring between both parties, what we see is that more often than not, many systems built in the fintech world were not built with the idea that they must be protected from fraudulent activity. And so things like fingerprint technology, which are great by themselves, is that enough? Is that adequate to protect the consumer and that financial transaction? These are the kinds of fundamental questions that we're working on. Increasing connectivity, no question, changes lives. And we see as we work with some of the new providers in the Internet of Things space, some really interesting and quite frankly, super convenient possibilities. It sounds silly, but it's very exciting to think about for me. The idea that I can have a camera in my refrigerator that tells me all the things I need to order from the grocery store. I can order them online, and I can have them delivered. That actually is happening in the world today. MasterCard is a part of some of that developing technology. We see revolutionary activity occurring in the digital commerce space. This is an area of great concern, and we'll talk more about it a little bit this morning. Because as we see growth in digital commerce or internet commerce, e-commerce, depending on which term you like to use, what we also see is great opportunity for the criminal community to compromise accounts and systems. It's a difficult thing to secure because of its vastness, the points of contact, and the relative sophistication of all who utilize the technology. Think about how much time and energy you put into building infrastructure, firewalls, protections, et cetera, within your own companies, and what great expertise that takes, how difficult it is sometimes to find that expertise and retain it for your company. And then think about the average consumer who has none of this protection available, has some perhaps rudimentary or standardized technology that will look for viruses, but really is not in a position to detect or prevent those kinds of infiltrations. And that consumer is vulnerable. So as we think about how to protect the consumer, we really think about not so much how we build firewalls or those kinds of things to protect the environment, but rather how we make sure that when we process the transaction or it passes across the network, that it's safe whether it's compromised or not. As we say, and I'm speaking now in the industry as a whole, we render the data useless, even if it's compromised. So it's useful for us to be able to process the transaction and complete the requested activity from the consumer. But if it gets into the wrong hands, then it cannot be utilized. That's the operating state that we're driving for in terms of the technology. We are powering payments everywhere. It's no longer just at the bank, it's no longer just at the ATM, it's everywhere. I was fortunate enough, because of this trip here, to take some time off and travel to a private game reserve that a friend of mine referred me to, and spend a few days in South Africa. What a spectacularly beautiful country you have, and what an amazing opportunity it was for me and for my husband to be able to be here and to enjoy that. But you know what amazed me the most? I'm in the middle of nowhere in Africa, and I've got cell service, right? And I can't tell you that I live in Connecticut, which is just outside New York City, and I work in New York City. When I go home at night, I do not have cell service. So infrastructure and the protection and the provision of infrastructure is something everyone in South Africa should be very proud of. You have a superior system to that which we have in Connecticut. And I applaud you for that. I may need to move here just so I can transact as I would like to. But making it all safe and secure is really at the heart of what we're all about. Consumer trust in our ability to deliver payments and to protect their money is at the heart of everything we do. It always has been. We've always been viewed as the trusted service providers. And as we bring others, including fintech companies, into our industry, it behooves us to act as responsible business partners and teach what we know so that we can work together to provide new and exciting opportunities. So what's happening with the world? We have 7 billion people on the planet. We see 4.9 billion connected things in use today. This is the magnitude of the issue that we're talking about. That's 2015. 30 billion things will be connected to the internet. And this is Javelin research, so it's not MasterCard data. That's the estimate by 2020. Think about that. How do we protect and secure 30 billion connected devices? 20 devices per person in 2015 today. And that's really talking about family units associated with a particular individual. We have 200 devices per person with Internet of Things enablement. So capacity may not be connected, but the opportunity and the capability. And we estimate, or Javelin does, that we will have 2.1 trillion will be the cost of breaches through digitization of consumers by and I think you cannot see that number, 2019. These are massive numbers when you think about what we've been doing, where we are today, and where we're going. So the complexity has never been greater, and the stakes have never been higher. This slide's a little bit about setting the landscape for the environment in which we operate. Changing payments world, increasing complexity you'll see on the left-hand side. Physical world of payments is certainly a part of how we operate today and will be. Still, unfortunately, in many parts of the globe, we have the existence of mag stripe, which creates great exposure and vulnerability. We have EMV coming online, and particularly in the United States, which is the largest market for EMV ever to come online. And what we're seeing are great changes as a result of that. Fraud has dropped dramatically in the United States, and we're nowhere near completing our migration process. However, by the end of this year, we estimate that some 70% of credit cards in the United States have been issued with an EMV card, with the remainder to follow shortly thereafter. However, we don't yet see the terminalization that we had hoped for, and we're slightly behind schedule, not significantly so. But merchants have been slow to wait and see that cards were to be issued. And now we have, because of liability shift, some of that fraud being unfortunately experienced by the merchant community. As a whole, then, our merchant community is now quickly moving forward with plans that they had in place to turn on machines which had already been deployed. So it's a very exciting and dynamic time for us in terms of the card industry overall in North America. And why is that important? Well, when the largest market in the world for EMV comes on board, what does that mean for the world globally? It's not actually a North American event, because what we see as a result of bringing that on board is significant changes in the migration of fraud. Whenever a market in the world has gone to EMV, what we have seen is that there's also then likewise a migration to e-commerce channels. Those where the card is not present and not capable of servicing the critical role that it plays in identifying the authenticity of that account and the account holder. So this is a big migration, and we're seeing its impacts roll out globally. Particularly in Europe, we're seeing significant increases in e-commerce fraud. Some of that is associated with growth in the market, in the e-commerce market itself, but a lot of it is the fact that the criminal community is looking for the weakest link. And for all of us, the weakest link is the vulnerability that they're hunting for and that we're hunting for to solve at the same time. The internet has brought tremendous commerce opportunity and certainly great growth in the payments industry overall. It's a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and for consumers brings incredible convenience, which we enjoy as consumers as well as bankers. Contactless certainly provides, where deployed across the globe, an additional tool that has great potential for eliminating and reducing fraud. And we have seen that in markets in Southeast Asia, such as Australia, which has had a tremendously successful contactless deployment. Mobile, cloud-based payment, the Internet of Things. All of these dynamics are a part of the world that we live in and that we focus on trying to find ways to secure. At the same time, we're dealing with, pretty much our traditional group of stakeholders as listed here, but we also have some new players. Principally, the digital giant companies who are now entering the market and who see a role for themselves, not the traditional role that we've played, but as providers of technology to facilitate the payments. How we work together, how we operate together, all of the infrastructure to make that safe and secure is something we're working globally to create. Our Deputy General, in his comments, mentioned the fact that across the globe, regulators are working together with private industry to create and to discuss the challenges that are faced by the dynamics of our industry. In most environments, that is unprecedented. Certainly in the United States, it is unprecedented. And as he mentioned, I'm now serving as a participant in a steering committee of industry providers. And it's not just payment providers, it's merchants, community banks, it is fintech companies, it is traditional financial institutions, it is merchants. So the Federal Reserve has said we need to go to the marketplace and understand the challenges and the dynamics of your business if we're ever going to be able to create a regulatory structure that will not only serve the current environment, but will grow with the industry over time. And so, collectively, from a grassroots effort, we're literally building the strategy and best practices guides for the Federal Reserve Bank, which is an unprecedented opportunity for the industry. We're also seeing these kinds of groups emerge globally. Just as we talk to each other, so do the regulators. And they share their ideas and their experiences with each other in order to build a safer and more secure global community. So what's our strategic opportunity? Well, here again, this is not the MasterCard strategic opportunity, but rather how the industry has come together and worked together and where we think we can make a difference. We want to enhance security in the ecosystem, from the point of purchase at the terminal all the way through to the Internet of Things, and ultimately to the consumer and the financial institution that serves them. We want to create a competitive advantage with products and services. All of us want to maintain that competition because through it, we find ourselves to be better. And we also find new and very exciting opportunities in terms of how we can work together. And more importantly, it fosters innovation for the benefit of the industry overall. And of course, ultimately, we want to deliver the best possible consumer experience. Well, we saw big numbers, we see a complex operating environment, and I hope I've not overwhelmed you with the complexity of all of what we're working with. No presentation, I think, in South Africa would be complete without a video of something I found overwhelming. So I hope I'm not overwhelming you. This is, of course, Victoria Falls. This was from my recent week up there. But it does feel to me sometimes like it's overwhelming. The speed at which it's coming, the complexity of the change, the difficulty and the innovation we see from the criminal community, and how we have to combat and think differently about where they play and how we prevent them from having success. All of these things could be overwhelming. But that's why conferences of this type are so important. Because it's really not about, we're not here, no one's here to sell products and services, but rather to get you thinking about what we see as strategically important issues so that you can prepare yourselves. So what's the challenge? We have 3 environments that we think are a great way to organize our thoughts around this. The first is the physical environment, and we're doing what we can through a variety of systems, including the delivery of the traditional mag-stripe cards, such as it is, and planned elimination of that, hopefully over the very near future. What that does is, of course, as long as it's in the market, it creates a risk of counterfeiting. So we have to address those risks in the traditional methods, which all of you, I'm sure, are engaged in doing today. However, we're still in a world where 48% of the cards that are in market, 48%, are mag-stripe. And as long as they're out there, that vulnerability will continue to exist. Well, what's that vulnerability? Obviously, the capture of account data, whether it's at the terminal or through hacking and compromise, all of those things are a part of the opportunity for the criminal community, which we have to continue to combat. At the same time, we're seeing great growth in digital. Identity verification, device verification, the capability of the telephone to participate in authenticating the consumer in that transaction is probably one of the most exciting developments that we have seen in many years. No longer do we have a dumb plastic card, which actually can do very little, evolving to a card with a chip in it, which can do something more by way of providing security around a transaction. Today, we can participate with the consumer at the point of sale via the device, and we can use a whole host of new and exciting things like biometrics to authenticate them, which really should bring tremendous security to that transaction. And finally, infrastructure. The world of data breaches is likely to continue, but I think some of the most interesting things around this are the fact that you'll see we had over 900 million identities exposed in the last 2 years. When we talk about identities, I'm talking not just about card numbers, but rather personal information, including government-issued ID numbers, how many children are in the family, what the annual incomes might be, anything that could be stored in the database. 23% of this was from hacks of financial institutions, but 77% from attacks on merchants and governments. So no longer is the criminal community necessarily focused on capturing the account number so they can create a counterfeit card, because the viability, the marketability of counterfeit cards is declining. And it's declining because of the deployment at VMV. So the criminal community is shifting and they're innovating. And they understand that with personal identifiable information and data, they can commit account takeover. And so, as I'm sure you've heard us all talk about before, what's old is new again. Many years ago, if you have been in the industry very long, you will know that account takeover crime was one of the most common and challenging aspects that we faced. Well, unfortunately for all of us, it's back again. And it's back again with an even greater importance, because today, with the power of the digital device to participate in the authentication process, the criminal opportunity is at the point of creation of that account. And so ID, verification, and authentication are becoming increasingly important in the process of deploying devices, wallets, and accounts in wallet. So we see tremendous shifts in what's happening in terms of the criminal activity. What's old is new again as well. Some of you have seen a structure like this, but it still works and it's survived time. And so when we think about how we're going to tackle all the myriad of issues and challenges that we have, we still use this traditional structure to help organize our thinking. We focus on preventing. Our goal, of course, as an industry is to make sure that the payment account is the safest account for the consumer to own. We want to secure that account through devices and infrastructure. And we want to secure the card holder through identity verification. We're going to continue to deploy as an industry a whole host of very innovative and exciting solutions, many of which use data and new and enhanced data to help us detect and prevent fraud. We're going to secure that transaction by stopping the fraudulent behavior in the first place. And we want to detect evolving security threats. One of the other very exciting things that we see happening across the globe is the creation of communities for data sharing. In the United States, there's an organization called the FSISAC, which is the Financial Institutions Information Security Account Committee, I believe, or conference. And what the FSISAC does is it creates an environment where those who've experienced or seen unusual malware can share that information, and members of the organization can access it and participate in the learnings associated with that. So if I've seen a particular malware in my system, I've been able to detect it, isolate it, eliminate it, and then create the patch or whatever appropriate remediatory action is required, then that activity is shared between all participants in the organization. The FSISAC has also grown. This is, by the way, a nonprofit organization that was organized by financial institutions and other participants in the marketplace in the US strictly for the purpose of sharing information on cybersecurity and cyber threats. That organization has expanded and grown now to Europe and also to Asia. So it's a wonderful, exciting opportunity for competitors to come together to tackle and fight crime. So a layered approach is essential. There's not going to be one silver bullet. We wish we could deliver it. If we could, we'd all be rich, right? Because we'd be able to prevent that and drive these costs out of our system. But we focus on it in three ways. We want to secure the account, we want to secure the cardholder, and we want to secure the transaction. This is my commercial slide that does have some of our products up there. I would have taken them out, but I was having difficulty doing that last night. So I apologize for that. But MasterCard has a host of solutions, some of which are identified here, that do just exactly that. We have well over 80 products and services in the security space. These are but a few of those. So there are many, many solutions. I'm going to share with you now a little bit about our real focus and what I hope is information that will inform your strategy as well. So at MasterCard, when we think about what's at the heart of all that we're doing and what we need to be focused on as an industry overall, we say it's entirely about the consumer experience. If we start with the consumer and end with the consumer and focus on the trust that they need to have and that we want them to have, that our solution is the safest, most secure, easiest, and simple to use, that at the end, we will win. And so we focus on the decisioning moment. And it's a moment of truth for all transactions. When I'm a consumer at the point of sale and I swipe or dip my card, what I want to know is that transaction is going to go through. I don't want it to be blocked. I don't want to be embarrassed if I'm entertaining family, friends, or clients. I want to know that my transaction will occur. And so the problem is, of course, that sometimes that does not happen. And in our industry today, with so many players and so many participants, as we saw on the previous slide, the cooperation, the collaboration of that effort to get to that approved decision is really very complex. And so we focus on how can we make this consumer experience better. It's all about, we say, the decisioning process. And how can we do more for the consumer to earn their trust every day. Let's talk for a moment about why it's so important and what the true impact is of a declined transaction. You know, if you think about it, I can tell you for many years of my career, I worked in-house at a financial institution, a large insurance company in the United States that also had a very large bank, one of the largest issuers of cards in the country. And our focus was on making sure that we didn't have fraud loss. So we would decline a transaction if we weren't sure. And in the early days, and I have to apologize to all the consumers to whom we did this, we might decline a transaction or block an account and wait for the consumer to call us so we could talk to them about, is this truly their transaction or not? What a terrible experience that is for a consumer. Their account is declined. They know they've got money in the account. They're at the point of sale, or completed a transaction, or buying dinner for family and friends, whatever that transaction might be. The really horrible experience is now suddenly their card's been declined. So what does the consumer do? Do they get cash out? In today's environment, in the old days perhaps, but in today's environment, that's extremely rare. What happens is they go to another card. And that's why our focus on this decisioning process and informing it to ensure higher levels of authorizations that are safe is really at the heart of what one of our key focuses at MasterCard. So what happens? Well, 1 in 6 of all US cardholders have experienced at least one decline because of suspected fraud in 2014. These numbers have not changed since that time. What happened? 32% of them stopped shopping with that retailer. They were embarrassed, or if they were online, they didn't know what the cause was. They just don't go back again when they have a bad experience. 25% decreased their card usage thereafter. In many cases, that card either was thrown in the trash or put in the back of the wallet. And that financial institution, regardless of how long they'd had that relationship with the customer, is the real loser in that process. 4 out of 10, 39%, abandoned that card entirely. Really significant impacts. What's the financial impact? 11% decline in GDV over 3 months associated with that particular cardholder. And 101 to 1 was the false decline dollars lost for every one in actual fraud. So every dollar in actual fraud was 101 resulted in, that was prevented as a result of this activity, really cost that financial institution, when it was a false decline, $100 in transactions. Now that's only over a short period of time that we measured that. But think about your own experiences and think about your own wallets. And think about the fact that you know a lot about the financial services industry. And so that which you might be willing to allow because you understand what's happening in the backdrop is all a mystery to a consumer. They know one thing and one thing only. They want to use the payment mechanism, card or otherwise, that they can rely on and that will continuously serve them in all moments, in all activities. Oops, a little too much. So the decline really does not impact the merchant, interestingly enough, because here's the other side of the data associated with that decline. So if it's a good user, account has been open for at least 30 to 60 days, no inherent issues. This is the consumer we're talking about, and no previous chargebacks. Let's say they go to merchant number 1. And these are 3 very typical experiences that are the result of the data that has been collected by MasterCard and others. So 68% of users will retry after a decline, right? That's what the merchant experience is. 20% of those retry on a different card. So that transaction is still going to go through, but it's going to be with somebody else's card when you decline. Or sometimes what the merchant does is they help solve by taking them to an entirely different payment mechanism altogether, which we think is not good for the financial institution. Merchant number 2's experience was 42% completed the transaction with a different card. Much higher numbers, some of that reflects the differences in what they were selling and providing over the internet. 16% of them made it their top card thereafter. So following a bad experience with one card and a successful experience with the next, the new card becomes the top of wallet card. Really significant change in that customer account relationship based solely on one transaction. For merchant number 3, what we saw was 21% are successful on the retry. So they'll try the transaction again, same card, and have some success. Perhaps in the meantime, the consumers called their bank and said, hey, why did you decline my transaction? Would you please approve it when you see it next? 16% were successful with a different card, and that's how they chose to complete the transaction. And 2% are successful with another payment type, a non-card payment type. So ACH, electronic payment of some other kind. So what happens here? That issuer who enjoys the primary wallet position declines the transaction because they're worried about fraud and they're not quite sure. And this is the fallout associated with that. So in this scenario, what you can see is we really can't afford, for how hard we work to get our customers in the door and keep them, to make bad decisions in this space. And that's why our focus is on this consumer experience. So what's it all about? So if I can get this to advance. It's all about trusted data. There's an explosion of data in the marketplace, but how we use it and how we bring it to bear and how we translate it into something that becomes an effective tool for us in order to make better decisions is key to winning in this process, in this game. Sharing data between participants. If you think about it today, it's almost as if the issuer has a certain set of data and they're actually flying blind. They don't know much about what the consumer is purchasing. They don't know what is happening in that transaction. They don't necessarily know whether the consumer has transacted with that merchant before. They may be seeing a transaction at that merchant and that card pairing for the very first time. So how do we share data so that the merchant can say, yes, it's the first time I've seen your card presented here, but I've delivered goods and services to this consumer at this address successfully for forever. How do we share that data across participants in the industry to better inform both of our decisioning processes? And how do we enhance the data with targeted insights? Is this the type of goods and service that a consumer has bought previously, such that it's a consistent transaction for them, but maybe not on this card? If you knew that, you might think very differently about your decisioning process. But with this proliferation of data, that's great. What do I do with all of it? How do I make sense of it? How do I translate it into something that I can use in a scoring or decisioning environment? These are the key issues and key questions which we're seeking to solve. So what we're thinking about is single standardized point of view across participants in the ecosystem, sharing data in unprecedented ways than we've ever seen before. And of course, we're talking about, in the industry, how we do this effectively and make it digestible or usable by even the most unsophisticated merchant, as well as the very sophisticated financial institution. It's one of the key things that is at the heart of the strategy that we're working to develop. The next thing I want to talk to you about is authentication. As I mentioned earlier, authentication is the heart of everything that's going to be the future of the work that we do. How we provision something to a new device, how we authenticate the consumer to that device, how we test it over time, how we create integrity in that process, all of these things. The devices themselves offer great opportunity for us to recognize this consumer and to recognize them time and time again as they come back. But one of the most interesting things, and I'm going to take a moment for a slightly commercial message here that I want to talk to you about, is in the authentication space and the development and use of biometrics. There are many wonderful solutions out there that will allow us to authenticate the consumer to the device. MasterCard has been at the heart of research early on, and we are working to develop standards for the industry overall on how to secure and protect biometric information. But what's most exciting about biometrics is the fact that the consumer no longer has to remember a password. Now, I don't know about you, I've got about 1 million passwords. Every account has a different combination. Some want capitals, some want numbers, some want hashtags. It's incredibly complex. And I can't remember them all. And in fact, I have to call my husband, who's standing, I thought I saw him in the back of the room here somewhere, every once in a while and say, what is my password for this? Because I can't remember. But this is a common challenge for all of us. So I want to take a moment to talk to you a little bit about a solution that we've developed in the biometric space. It's one of many great opportunities that are out there.
Passwords. You can never get them right the first time. Can you remember them all? The variations with a capital and check.
So why is that important? Well, for a whole host of things. We're obviously very excited about it. You may have read about it in the industry as selfie pay. That's the kind of big name it's been given. But what's really interesting about this is the fact that the consumer no longer has to think about the process of identifying themselves to a transaction or a device. They don't have to remember anything, and it doesn't have to change from time to time. So this kind of trend, we think, is going to be one of the mega trends that will impact our industry moving forward. And I would suggest that all of you, if you've not explored biometrics, need to be thinking about that, and need to be thinking about, more importantly, not the solution so much as the infrastructure that you'll need to be building to facilitate a whole host of different opportunities and devices. Our strategy at MasterCard is to support all and to provide platforms that do that. I think it's a good strategy because we don't know where this industry will move. But in the early days, we believe it offers some very exciting opportunities. So omni-channel identity verification is going to be key for the industry overall. Digital payments, mobile banking, suspect transaction validation, digital wallets, in-branch activity, call center, all of it are places and environments in which Biometric identification can be used to bolster and enhance the security around a transaction. And we think this is a very exciting opportunity, regardless of which solution you may choose. Another really exciting development that's focused on the consumer experience for us is location alerts. You know, if you think about that device which we all now carry around with us, it has tremendous capability to tell us where we are and, probably more importantly, what we're doing. And of course, what's really critical here is the consumer privacy around that data or information. We're working on and looking at opportunities where the consumer would be able to opt in, as we call it, to a particular product or service, such as a location alert. And when we would then be able to use the data concerning where they are to match up whether or not the device is with them, number one, and whether or not that device location is logical in terms of a transaction that is occurring. So if I get on an airplane in New York and fly to South Africa, and I want to purchase something at the beautiful shopping mall next door, the system will allow, our location alert system will allow us to say, oh, Nancy's traveling in South Africa, I can see her device is with her. This transaction risk is probably significantly less than what I would have assessed it using my traditional tools and methods. Because having never been to South Africa before, certainly my financial institution would have declined that transaction. The other alternative, of course, is I can pick up the phone and call them and tell them I'm traveling, but that's not a very good consumer experience. This is all seamless, behind the scene, without customer interaction, and it poses some really exciting opportunities for us. So this decline cross-border transaction activity, also a very exciting thing for us. This is a space where data becomes important, location alerts become important. Certainly the mobile device produces great opportunity for us to verify who that consumer is and whether or not this is a good transaction. You know, I wish I could say to all of you that the world operated the way it used to, but I know increasingly we are all mobile, we travel greatly, we conduct business across border, perhaps sitting at home in front of our computer. And so the ability and the capabilities that we as financial services provider will need to provide must be smart, must reflect the actual patterns of consumers in terms of their behavior and travel. And we have to step up our game if we're going to be able to continue to facilitate making good decisions that detect and prevent fraud before we have a bad experience for that consumer. So our vision is that there are a whole host of products and services. These are but a few. And our competition provides, you know, many similar things. We'd like to think our products or services are better. They're probably in the room. But I think the thinking that we do together is probably the greatest power that we bring. While we, most of us are fierce competitors across the globe, there is in the fraud space the one place where we can come together and agree that we need to partner and work together to detect and prevent fraud. So these are but a few of the things. If you're interested in some of our offerings, I would suggest that you visit the MasterCard booth outside. So my final thoughts. I hope you walk away today having thought of several things. Let the consumer experience be your guide. When you're making decisions, think first about what the fallout will be for them and what the cost will be if you must decline a transaction. A layered approach to security is essential. There's no one silver bullet. That's been the case for some period of time. Unfortunately for all of us, probably more layers will continue to grow as we innovate and bring new players and partners who have different needs into our marketplace. Platforms that provide flexibility and the opportunity and the ability for a quick response in emergent situations are essential. If you're under attack, you cannot afford to wait minutes, even hours, days, weeks, or years. Those days are gone because the costs associated with that are far too tremendous. The utilization of enhanced data shared across lines is the future of informing both parties, all parties to the transaction, and securing that better experience for the consumer. Collaboration and cooperation as participants in the marketplace will be key. Biometrics, we believe, offer great opportunities for promise, and it's not just selfie pay or the fingerprint. Those are both great technologies. There are many more that are evolving and developing that have different degrees of reliability. And as the technology evolves, they too will ascend to the level that some of these technologies currently provide for us today. Finally, MasterCard's here for you. We're here not only to work with regulators to inform their decisioning and their ideas about what works, we're here to inform about the pace of evolution, the change in the marketplace. We're thinking about these things, and we love people who agree and disagree with us. We find our competitors help inform our thinking, just as unfortunately we probably inform theirs, because we see together different things and different aspects of the marketplace. But when we collaborate, we produce the best work possible. Great strategic thinking, ultimately all of it is for the benefit of the participants in the marketplace. I thank you for this tremendous opportunity to be here, to participate in your conference. I'll be here over the course of the next couple of days at the MasterCard booth and around. We have a day on Wednesday that we're sponsoring as well. I look forward to hearing from you the challenges you're facing within your organizations. And if there's anything I can do or any thought or idea you'd like to discuss or that you think we might be able to address, I welcome that opportunity. With that, my thanks to all of you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Nancy. Amazing there. Can we take some questions as well, ladies and gentlemen? I'll bring a microphone to you in the front. Question at the back for you, sir. Just a quick question while we bring microphones around, and they'll start to move through to you now. You reminded me of a story you told an African story. I was in New York just before Christmas in a supermarket buying a case of bottled water. And the guy in front of me was buying his weekly groceries or whatever, paying with his card, couldn't remember the passcode, shouted out to his wife a couple of aisles away, "What's the password on this card?" And she went, 6, 3, 4, 9. And you want to see how many heads went up in the store. It was the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. Are we struggling, Nancy? Are we in fraud detection? Chasing a major back? Are we catching up? How far behind are we in the real world? And how good does stuff look?
I don't think we're behind.
Good.
I think there's a lot of great work going on to share data and be smart and think differently about cyber threat. One of the really exciting developments that we've seen is there's been a fairly significant reduction in database compromise in the US, which really has driven a lot of the fraud globally for quite some period of time. You would think that would continue, and it has continued to some extent, but the large data breaches of the past, knock on wood right now, have slowed down. Part of that has to do with advancing things like tokenization and the utilization of tokens rather than the storage of account data. And then, of course, encryption of transactions point to point, from the moment of transaction to authorization and completion. So a lot of the infrastructure work is ongoing, and the merchant community has really taken a whole new view of the risk, responsibility, and the vulnerability of their systems to these forms of attack. And their partnership with the payments industry overall has made a huge difference in continuing to reduce that risk. So I think we've made great strides in that space. The area that concerns me more is just the innovation that we've seen around credential compromise, in particular data theft or identity theft, and the speed at which that's growing in the marketplace. That concerns us a great deal. And of course, we're working on a whole host of things to engage the consumer to authenticate a transaction.
Lovely.
Jolene Young from KPMG. Nancy, thank you for your presentation. And I was very interested in the EMV deployment in North America. However, I have a question. The deployment is not chip and PIN, but chip and signature. I don't understand. Perhaps you can help me understand.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Jolene.
I couldn't agree with you more. As a security professional, and it's always been MasterCard's position, that it's, we say chip and choice, meaning that our financial institutions can make a decision about which technology, but we advise PIN preferred. And we're very proud of the position that we've taken in the marketplace in this space. The merchant community in the United States has been very critical of the industry for allowing chip and signature to be deployed. And their criticism has been around the fact that with liability shift, that they're a participant in the risk associated with that.
That was my follow-up question.
Sorry?
That was my follow-up question, the liability shift.
Yeah, so that's the criticism. There's been some legal action filed, not against us, thankfully, and I won't comment on that because it's not appropriate. But we're very proud of the fact that our strategy, quite frankly, in this space, and our support for chip and PIN has served us well. We've advised all of our customers, or MasterCard issuers primarily, that if you're going to participate in this, build for chip and PIN, turn it on when you think your consumers are ready. And that's the state of that migration.
Cool, thank you very much. Thank you for waiting patiently, sir. Please also identify yourself and your business in terms of the question you have.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
If you hold it nice and close.
I'm Paul Mouton from Trade Technologies, and I'm afraid the lady stole my question because I was exactly asking that question about chip and PIN and the effect you're going to think it's going to have in the marketplace and when it might change in the US, because obviously in Africa and Europe we're quite used to chip and PIN.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing the question.
He was asking a very similar question about chip and PIN. And
Yeah.
just help me at the back end of that, sir, as well.
Maybe a little follow-on comment, and hopefully
Please do, that would do.
I'll address your question. So I think the gist of what I heard was, when do we think it will come? So we're in the first stage of migration, which is for many chip and signature. We left each financial institution the opportunity to make a decision that's appropriate for their financial institution. And we haven't set no deadline for that migration yet to PIN. I think the marketplace, in the US, we allow the marketplace equilibrium to drive timelines for product deployment in most situations, in the absence of regulatory action. There appears to be no indication from our regulators whatsoever that they will drive towards a deadline to implement PIN anytime soon.
Wow.
So we aren't hearing that. That doesn't mean that couldn't change tomorrow. But with all the collaboration going on, I think those conversations would at least have started if timelines were being discussed, and I've not participated in any. The merchant community will push us, and we will respond because they're very important customers and players. And we are absolutely committed at MasterCard to migrating to PIN globally as soon as possible. But one small thing. Remember the whole conversation around PIN? Think about that. We're very focused on staying tied to PIN, and it is a very good solution in the marketplace today. But I think its timeline is in question as well. Because as long as it's static and not dynamic, I think there's a risk associated with that. I would argue that mobile devices and NFC in particular probably afford greater safety and security. Of course, we can't abandon PIN. It's ubiquitous at this point globally, and we'll want to continue to support that. But I would say to you, start thinking now about the speed at which the migration will be away from PIN and to the device, perhaps, as the methodologies for authenticating the transaction.
Cool. Does that help you, sir?
Yes, I've got a follow-up question though related to this.
A little louder, please.
Can I ask you to hold the microphone a little
hard to
closer?
Can you hear me better this way?
Yeah.
Better,
Good,
thank you.
okay. The EMVCO, the PCI Council participation that's in the US quite contingent, and the retailers' participation in that. Have you got any views on that?
EMVCO's participation in
the PCI Council and its structures and so forth.
So, EMVCO is essentially a nonprofit that has been organized for purposes of the payment industry to come together and make decisions about common structures that will facilitate smooth payments, right? And EMVCO sets standards which allow the United States to financial institutions to make choices. I don't think that EMVCO
And PCI, sorry.
yeah,
PCI
Visa's
Council.
participating, American Express, JCB, I think I got them all. I don't know, EMVCO could and has fostered an environment for encouraging the deployment of advanced technologies. They've provided great leadership in setting standards in the tokenization space and will continue to evolve the token standards to make sure they serve the industry well. I don't see as competitors MasterCard and Visa in particular have very different viewpoints on this, and as a result, I don't think EMVCo will become the environment that will foster that evolution. I think the marketplace is likely to be the accelerator.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much indeed. A further question, sir? You have a microphone. Please identify yourself. Hold it close. I promise you it feels good.
Adrian Hope Bailey from Ripple. You identified identity as a key piece of securing the digital commercial environment. But what you haven't really addressed is the fact that today, many of the incumbents are losing their customers to the technology companies like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Apple, who own the devices that we use. So they ultimately control how we identify ourselves, what gets installed on them, what capabilities they enable for the traditional incumbents. And so we're seeing them starting to bring payments products of their own to market and very quietly slipping in to steal market share. How would the incumbents, how can the incumbents deal with that?
Well, I think digital wallets are probably the greatest opportunity that we have. The data that we have collected in the marketplace, which is relatively extensive, tells us that if you say to a consumer, who do you want to trust your financial transaction to? Your bank, who you've had a relationship with in many cases for a long period of time, or a fintech company that might be a relatively new entrant to the market. What consumers will tell you is that I trust the fintech company for some things, but not for everything. But I trust my bank for everything. And so it's really a very interesting dynamic, and we're lucky and fortunate that we have worked so hard to earn this trusted relationship with our consumers, which is so critical to our businesses and our plans. So that relationship that we've built is one that we need to protect, ensure, and as we would argue, continue to invest in terms of ensuring that it's a continuously great experience. We do have the expertise. We've learned and we've seen, the fintech companies are evolving their expertise. They want to learn, but there's a lot of things they don't know about our space. So I would tell you today, we clearly, I think, have competitive advantage, and we're working with them. We see lots of opportunity. And let's be clear about something, which I think is really important, and probably very much so in the African market, more so than anywhere else. That today, only 15% of transactions in the world are occurring in some form of payment facility, a card, ACH, or whatever. The rest are all in cash. So we still have this tremendous economy that is a cash-driven economy. And we would tell you that there's tremendous opportunity for everyone to grow, to compete, and to deliver the best possible solution in that space. We want to preserve and protect the transaction activity we have, but we also want to grow and convert that which we don't have today. So to the extent we can bring people into the marketplace, whether it's via technology provided by a fintech, and then ultimately bring them into commerce in the marketplace so they become good candidates for financial institution relationships, we welcome those opportunities. For us, we think the preservation of those existing relationships really comes down to the wallet and the trust in the wallet and the capabilities of a wallet product. If you've not explored a wallet product, we think that becomes the cornerstone for that relationship, and then how it operates really is an opportunity to preserve and protect that relationship with the consumer in an unprecedented manner. So that's a piece of our vision in that space. I think it's partially but not fully responsive, to your question. Yes, we are worried about competition, as we always are, whether it's from those in the payment space or those outside. But we also are opening new doors through our partnerships with fintech companies.
Awesome. Nice answer. Thank you very much indeed. And I think we'll leave the formal questions there, ladies and gentlemen. As Nancy has said, she'll be available over at the stand in the exhibition area as well. But before we ask her to take her leave from the main stage and wander back to the exhibition area, may I present this small token, Nancy, to you on behalf of the conference organizing team. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mike.
And presenting to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.